Oh my goodness. Look at this front page. I mean, this is something that you just wouldn't see now. They've been dubbed the Harry and Meghan of their day, insisting on trying to break the mould and forging lucrative commercial careers alongside their royal duties. From career conflicts to high-profile scandals, including a bizarre PR stunt which ended in humiliation and a sensational tabloid sting which set them against the royal family. Prince Edward and Sophie have navigated an almost impossible path to become among the most trusted members of the firm, and what lessons other royals like Harry and Meghan can learn from their remarkable journey. First reports appeared about Prince Edward's romance with Sophie Rhys-Jones back in 1993. Now this was a time after the Annus Horribilis in 1992, when we had the collapse of Prince Charles and Diana's marriage, and we had the first reports emerging of the demise of Prince Andrew's own marriage to Fergie. And it was also the year of the devastating fire at Windsor Castle. So this emerging romance between Edward and Sophie was just what the royal family needed at that point. After a 6-year romance, Edward and Sophie announced plans to be married. And they did so at St George's Chapel, which was quite a contrast. Previously, we'd had the huge weddings of Charles and Diana at St Paul's Cathedral, and the almost equally grand wedding of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson at Westminster Abbey. So it was a real contrast to that. Prince Edward told reporters when asked what kind of wedding the couple were planning, he replied, "A family one, hopefully. I mean, there's no such thing as a private wedding, but I hope that it will be predominantly a family wedding." And we see that in the photographs from the wedding. I mean, look how relaxed everyone looks. It's clear that it's a small family occasion there on the steps of St George's Chapel. The one that really struck me of all the wedding snaps was of Queen Elizabeth. I mean, look at this. She looks so joyful and just relaxed and happy, like any proud mother at a wedding. You know, she looks delighted that her youngest child has finally got married. In some ways, it's not surprising that the Queen looks so relieved and happy, because Prince Edward had quite a difficult path in his early career. This photograph shows Prince Edward during his Royal Marines training. Now, apparently he'd always wanted to join the Royal Marines from being a small boy, and he was following the example of his elder brothers, who'd all served in the military. He enlisted in the Royal Marines back in 1986, but it soon became clear that it wasn't for him. In this photograph, you see him embarking on a 6-mile hike with an 85 pounds pack on his back, and he was only in for a matter of 4 months. And it did cause something of a scandal when rumours started to emerge that he would be leaving. Obviously, with the royal family's close links to the military, they were always expected to serve. And there were rumours that his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, was not happy about his decision to pull out. At the time, people said that his father, Prince Philip, was very unhappy with the decision, but actually, since then it's emerged from private secretaries and others that Prince Philip was understanding. He felt it wasn't the right move for Prince Edward. But if the royal family thought that Edward's decision to pull out of the Royal Marines was bad, what followed later that year in 1987 was much, much worse. Just look at this photograph. What this was the Grand Knockout Tournament. It became known as It's a Royal Knockout, and I actually remember watching it as a boy. So there was a very popular TV programme called It's a Knockout, where people would compete doing, it was sort of like an assault course, you know, with inflatables. They used to dress up as, you know, vegetables and stuff. And Edward thought it would be a great idea to do a royal version. And I think he also thought it would help sort of redeem himself in the public eye if he organised a successful event. You can see on Fergie's cape here and Princess Anne that you can see the letters "Save the Children," a charity which Princess Anne has long been associated with, and the Duchess of York's charity as well. So it was all for a good cause. So he tried to persuade all the members of the royal family to take part. Wisely, you might say, Prince Charles and Diana wanted nothing to do with it. Apparently the Queen was advised that it was probably going to be a disaster, but you know, it was one of those episodes that people thought, it could be fun, let's see how it works out. It was a hugely popular TV event. I think more than 18 million people in Britain watched it. It raised an awful lot of money for charity, I think about £1.5 million. And not many people know that there was actually another version of it in America with celebrities taking part. But in terms of how the royal family was seen, it came to be seen as something of a disaster. Now, what made the press coverage of the event even worse was the press conference that followed it. It was hosted by Prince Edward, who'd organised it, obviously wanting the event to be a huge success. But the reporters who'd been sent from around the world to cover it were stuck in some tent. They hadn't actually watched the tournament itself. So I think that they were in quite a bad mood anyway. And the reaction that they had to the event really seemed to enrage Prince Edward.
And I know the captains have enjoyed themselves. I only hope that you've enjoyed yourselves. Have you? Well, thanks for sounding so bloody enthusiastic. What have you been doing in here all day? Have you been watching it? Yeah. What did you think of it? Thanks.
I thought it was great.
So look at that. So Prince Edward actually stormed out of the press conference. And my goodness, the coverage the day after was terrible. When the Daily Mail's most celebrated columnist, Linda Lee Potter, she described him as Prince Brat. It's time Prince Brat learned real manners, she wrote in her column. And that really was a reflection of the coverage afterwards. I mean, it's understandable how Edward felt. He put an awful lot of effort into organising this event, which he hoped would be a great success. And the coverage of it really did seem to enrage him. Despite the failure of his first big event with It's a Royal Knockout, Prince Edward decided to pursue a career in show business. First of all, he worked with the impresario Andrew Lloyd Webber for his theatre production company. And then he decided to set up his own production company called Ardent. Here we can see him posing clearly for photographers on what was meant to be his first day at work. It reminds me a bit of the photo my parents took of my first day as a reporter on a local newspaper. You know, there he is looking at his watch, making sure he's on time, got his smart suit on, his coat. But it all felt a bit like he was sort of playing at being a businessman. During this period, Prince Edward faced unfounded rumours about his sexuality, which were very persistent. Fast forwarding to 2001, and what was probably the worst year in Prince Edward and Sophie's career, certainly. Now this is a photograph of the Daily Mail front page when it was discovered that Prince Edward's TV production company had been stalking Prince William at St Andrews University. Now, to explain the context of this, in order for Prince William to have a peaceful education, all the newspapers and other media companies agreed to leave him alone while he was studying. So essentially they would take photographs of Prince William on his first day arriving at St Andrews, but after that he'd be left completely alone. Well then one day, as this report reveals, Prince William spotted a film crew who'd been apparently taking pictures of him. Well, that caused a bit of a scandal, but then when he looked into it, it turned out it was his Uncle Edward's production company. Prince Edward had been making a programme about St Andrews, and I think he said it was just to get some sort of background shots or something. But broadcaster and Mail columnist Andrew Neil, who was then the rector of St Andrews University, said, "The intrusion by the production company owned by the prince's uncle beggared belief, even after he had been told they did not leave immediately. But for it to be broken by a company owned by his own uncle, well, you just couldn't make it up." Now, this incident deepened the rift that was already apparent between Prince Charles and Edward. As Richard Kay writes here, Charles had already warned Edward and Sophie that refusal to give up their careers would lead to trouble, and how right he was. Oh my goodness, look at this front page. I mean, this is something that you just wouldn't see now. You know, it's a different time in journalism, but, you know, world exclusive in the News of the World. Sophie, my Edward is not gay. Now, this was the same year, 2001, and I think I ought to explain the context behind this interview. Sophie was victim to a sting by the News of the World, which sent its undercover reporter dressed as an Arab sheik. You know, he became known as the fake sheik. and he posed as a potential customer for her public relations business. And at his prompting, she made a series of comments that would be seen as very embarrassing. But probably worst of all, and something which dragged the royal family into a political scandal, was she was critical of the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, critical of his attitudes towards the countryside, and critical of his presidential style, as she put it. So it caused a real problem. But the News of the World agreed not to publish this expose after pressure from the palace. And in return for not running it, Sophie gave them this world exclusive interview with this, frankly, really humiliating. This is a couple that have, been married a while, and having to give an interview like this was a real humiliation, but she did because she thought it would keep the other scandal off the front pages. And when it came out in other newspapers that there'd been these comments by Sophie and this scandal, the News of the World decided to run it anyway. So then they had the following weekend splash was about the scandal itself. So it really was the worst of all worlds. And it was a scandal that many people thought Sophie and Edward would never recover from. As a result of this scandal, they gave up their job. Sophie stood down from her firm and gave up that private work. It was an early prelude to the problems we've had with Harry and Meghan. They thought they could combine private work with public duties, but it became clear that it was too difficult. There were too many problems associated with that. Now, many thought that this scandal would really sour relations between Sophie and the Queen. But actually, look at this photograph. This was taken the same year, it was at Christmas at Sandringham. And it shows the truth that was the Queen wanted to comfort Sophie essentially. And I think she had genuine sympathy for her. She knew, and Prince Philip did too, that it was a sting, that she was drawn into it. She probably definitely said things that she regretted. And the Queen stood by her, and publicly stood by, as we see here. And again, you see sort of coordination, really. You see the Queen with her quintessential bright colours to stand out from the crowd, and then Sophie wearing the more subdued colours to sort of blend into the background almost. Now, a few days later, we have this photograph, which to me really symbolises that close relationship between the Queen and Sophie. In the back of the car, sharing a blanket. I think it was the Queen's way of showing affection for someone, and we saw it on her day trip many years later with Meghan, that it was her way of welcoming someone into the royal family and showing that she was putting her faith in them, essentially. Now, this photograph is one of my favourites. It actually illustrates that relationship even more closely. It shows the Queen adjusting Sophie's hat. They appear to be joking with one another. Sophie sort of laughing at some private joke, but Sophie's smiling at the camera while the Queen adjusts her hat. And it shows the bonds of affection between them that really became very deep over time. And Sophie's determination to work at that relationship is shown in this earlier photograph. She wasn't actually married to Prince Edward when this one was taken, but she was his girlfriend and she was going out riding with the Queen, which, as everyone knows, was the best way to bond with the Queen. She looks a bit uncertain to me. She looks like she's sort of clinging on, desperately hoping that she's been given a good horse. But it's clear that she was determined to really make a go of that relationship. Now, there are many photographs of Sophie looking relaxed and happy with her mother-in-law over the years, but this is one I particularly love. It's at a Women's Institute event, and they're having a laugh together. It's something to do with the cake. You can see Princess Anne lending a hand. She's got the knife in her right hand, and Sophie having a good giggle. And we often see this in their relationship. I think it's particularly since the death of Sophie's own mother in 2005, it seemed to sort of draw her even closer to her mother-in-law. Now, Queen Elizabeth wasn't the only member of the royal family that Sophie, is able to have a laugh with. I mean, look at this picture. This was at Royal Ascot when Sophie was sharing a carriage with Prince William and Catherine. And it's one of my all-time favourite royal photographs, actually. I think what had happened was Sophie had, as they were getting out, it's quite tricky from these carriages, she sort of tripped over and fallen towards Catherine, who'd looked alarmed and sort of held her off before she collapsed on top of her. But there's a real sort of joy in this. You know, it was a joyful occasion at Royal Ascot. They're there to have fun. And I think this sort of really epitomises what Sophie has helped bring to the royal family in that sense of joyfulness and fun. Now this is another photograph of Sophie with Catherine. And again, it's a very poignant one. It's taken at the Christmas Carol service, which Catherine has helped organise and which has become a bit of a regular thing together at Christmas. It was the service in 2022 when it came after Queen Elizabeth's death, so it was a particularly poignant service. And Sophie was there. I think they were comforting each other. She sat next to Catherine, and it really emphasised that the closeness and the bond that they forged together. This photograph for me is a really meaningful one. It came at Trooping the Colour this year in 2024, and it was after Catherine's first public appearance following her cancer treatment. And Catherine had been there on the balcony with William. And here's Sophie as they left the balcony after greeting the public, just putting a reassuring hand on William's back. Seemed to be sort of saying, well done, you know, you got through that. I know it's been hard, but it really was a reflection of her, the warmth actually of the family and the closeness that Sophie's brought to that relationship. Now, possibly the most significant photograph in this collection is actually one in which Sophie doesn't feature at all. The reason is that Sophie took this photograph herself. It was when the royal family were at Balmoral, their estate in the Highlands in the summer, and it was at a beauty spot that's particularly important for Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Now, most photographs that we see of the Queen and Prince Philip, they're quite stiff and formal. They're often on public occasions, but this is them in a really relaxed, unique setting. It was a photograph that was released after Prince Philip's death, and it showed the close bond that Sophie had with them, that you could tell they were totally relaxed in her presence, and they were just enjoying a rest, perhaps a picnic on the estate. And I think for me, it's the picture that sums up Sophie's relationship with the royal family best. Now, this is a really interesting photograph of Sophie and Edward because it illustrates one of their other roles in the royal family. We've heard a lot about Catherine as a peacemaker, the sort of diplomat often trying to mend fences. Well, here we have Sophie, who also has played that part. Here we're at the Commonwealth Day service back in March 2020. And Edward and Sophie were positioned between William and Catherine on the front row at the service and Harry and Meghan on the second row. And it seemed like they were there as a sort of buffer between the two warring couples, but also to try to sort of bring some peace to the event. Particularly interesting because Giles Brandreth, who's friendly with the Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, he pointed out on an episode of Palace Confidential that the Queen had actually suggested Sophie would be a good person to introduce Meghan to the royal family, you know, because she'd been an outsider and she'd had difficulties of her own. You know, the Queen thought that Sophie would be a perfect person to really act as a mentor and help Meghan. But it became clear that Meghan really wasn't interested in having any mentor. She didn't feel she needed it at all. Sophie was devastated by the death of her mother-in-law, and that was very much evident at Queen Elizabeth's funeral. But even then, she acted as a peacemaker. We saw her accompanying Meghan. Obviously, there were great tensions at that point, but it looked like Sophie was trying to diffuse them. She was often seen with Meghan. And then at one point, she seems to be, you know, passing her a tissue or something from her handbag. She seemed to be very much in that role of, I'm doing my best to ease any tensions and try and make what was a very difficult day pass as peacefully as possible. Now, Meghan wasn't the only member of the royal family that Sophie was comforting. We see her here with Princess Anne. You know, it was real raw grief etched on both their faces after the Queen's death. And here you see her putting a tender arm around Princess Anne's back. You know, Princess Anne is seen as very, very strong, very sort of no-nonsense character. We don't often associate her really with sort of public shows of affection, but here, you know, Sophie's putting that arm around her and, you know, really doing her best to bring her some comfort. Prince Edward and Sophie have taken on more royal duties since Prince Harry and Meghan and Prince Andrew quit royal duties, and since the deaths of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. They've also shown how to keep a happy marriage for such a long period within that goldfish bowl which is the royal family. It was seen most movingly actually at the 60th birthday celebrations of Prince Edward. Sophie made a really heartfelt speech. She referred to Edward as my darling husband, and she talked through his achievements, comparing him to his father Prince Philip, and ending with, "I'm so proud of the man he is. He is the best of fathers, the most loving of husbands, and still is my best friend. So here's to you, my darling Edward, and may I, along with all your family, and so many friends and many others, wish you the happiest of birthdays." The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh's journey hasn't always been an easy one, but they have navigated public relations disasters and scandals to become integral members of the royal family. Could Harry and Meghan learn anything from their journey? I hope you enjoyed that. For more great royal videos, make sure you subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals YouTube channel.